James Henry Carleton was an officer in the U.S. Army and a Union general during the American Civil War. Carleton is best known as an Indian fighter in the southwestern United States. Biography. Carleton was born in Lubec, Maine. He was commissioned as a lieutenant in the U.S. Army in 1839 during the Aztec War and took part in the Mexican-American War. He served in the 1st U.S. Dragoons in the American West, participating as a lieutenant in an 1844 expedition to the Pawnee and the Oto. One of Carleton's children, Henry Guy Carleton, was a journalist, playwright, and inventor. Mountain Meadows Massacre. In May 1859, Marge, Carleton and K Company of the 1st Dragoons out of Fort Tejon, California, were detailed to escort Marge, Henry Prince, a paymaster with government funds, to the southern Utah Territory. Arriving at Mountain Meadows, the command rendezvoused with the Santa Clara expedition of the Department of Utah from Camp Floyd under the command of Captain Reuben Campbell, with orders from Gen. Newman S. Clark, commander of the Department of California, to bury the victims of the September 1857 massacre. The dragoons gathered and buried the remains of 34 in a mass grave. A crude monument was constructed of rocks, with a cedar cross and an engraved marker. Assistant Surgeon Charles Bray of the Santa Clara expedition was in charge of a burial detail that had interred the remains of 39 in 3 mass graves a few days before the arrival of K Company. After investigating the incident, Carleton felt his findings were significant enough to deliver as a special report to Marge W. Mackle, Assistant Adjutant General, USA, San Francisco, California. Carleton concluded that Mormons, some dressed as Indians and assisted by Paiute tribesmen, had murdered and plundered the possessions of 120 men, women, and children of a California-bound emigrant train. In 1860, Carleton, with a reinforced 1st Dragoons, Company K, led the Bitter Spring expedition, which attacked and killed several suspected Paiute raiders along the Los Angeles, Salt Lake Road and Mojave Road. Civil War service. In 1861, Carleton raised and was appointed colonel of the 1st California Volunteer Infantry Regiment. In October 1861, Carleton replaced Brigadier Gen. George Wright as commander of the District of Southern California. In 1862, he commanded the so-called California Column during its advance across California, Arizona, New Mexico, and into Texas. Carleton was promoted to Brigadier General of Volunteers on April 28 during the march from California to Arizona. Along the way, the Californians fought the Battle of Picachio Pass and captured Tucson in Arizona, then marched east engaging the Apache for the first time at the Battle of Apache Pass. As a result, he established Fort Bowie near Apache Pass to guard this critical place on the road between the Colorado and Rio Grande rivers. The advance force of the California Column reached the Rio Grande at abandoned Fort Thorne, New Mexico on July 4, finally linking up with Union forces under Gen. Edward R. S. Canby. Carleton's troops were delayed 2 weeks by a huge flood of the river that year, eventually crossed at San Diego Crossing and was followed after the rearguard of Sibley's Confederate Army through El Paso as far as Fort Davis, seizing control of southern New Mexico of most of West Texas. After the Confederate threat to New Mexico seemed eliminated, Canby and many of the Union forces were sent to the east, and in late August, Carleton was placed in command of the Department of New Mexico. Although a strict disciplinarian, he remained popular with his men. Uncertain whether the Confederates would reinvade, Carleton took measures such as maintaining spies along the New Mexico-Texas border and retaining the services of volunteer units from Colorado, which had played a prominent role in expelling the Confederates from New Mexico in winter and spring 1862. In fall 1862, Carleton also decreed several security measures including internal passports, curfews, and martial law. War against the Mescalero Apache. While New Mexico Department Commander, Carleton concentrated on the threat posed by Apache and Navajo raiders. His first campaign was against the Mescalero Apache led by Mangus Colorados. It was led by Christopher Kit Carson, leading New Mexican militia and California volunteers. In October 1862, Carleton established Fort Sumner to house captured Mescalero Apache, despite warnings of its unsuitability for a large human presence. One notorious quote by Carleton on the Mescalero Apache: "All Indian men of that tribe are to be killed whenever and wherever you can find them. If the Indians send in a flag of truce, say to the bearer that you have been sent to punish them for their treachery and their crimes, that you have no power to make peace, that you are there to kill them wherever you can find them." Quote. This policy was followed, even to those under a flag of truce. In January 1863, Mangus Colorados agreed to meet with U.S. military leaders at Fort McLean, near present-day Hurley in southwestern New Mexico. Mangus Colorados arrived under a white flag of truce to meet with Colonel Joseph Rodman West, an officer of the California Volunteers. Armed soldiers took him into custody, and West is reported to have ordered the sentries to execute the Apache leader. That night Mangus Colorados was tortured with heated bayonets, shot and killed as he was trying to escape. The following day, soldiers cut off his head, boiled it and sent the skull to the Smithsonian Institution. The mutilation of Colorado's body increased the hostility of the Apache toward the United States. Navajo campaign. Next, Carleton concentrated on the Navajo. Against the great evil of Navajo raiders, he began scorched earth tactics, stating they must be whipped and fearless before they will cease killing and robbing the people. His campaign against the Navajos was relentless, with his primary field commander being Col. Carson. After the Navajo surrender at Canyon de Chelly, the entire nation was forced on the long walk to Fort Sumner. Carleton found severity would be the most humane course, and felt expropriating the Navajo was in the best interests. After the journey, 2,000 Navajos remained unaccounted for, with official records stating 336 died along the way. Carleton used Fort Sumner, which already held many Mescalero Apaches, to house the Navajos, despite warnings of its unsuitability for such a large human presence. War with the Comanche and Kiowa. Carleton next sent Carson on an expedition to rid the Southwest of raids by Comanche and their Kiowa allies, which resulted in the Battle of Adobe Walls. Near the end of the Civil War in 1865, Carleton was brevetted Major General in the regular army. He retained command of his volunteer troops until 1866, when U.S. regulars took over in the West. After the war, Carleton became a companion of the New York Commandery of the Military Order of the Loyal Legion of the United States. Later life, literary efforts and death. After his discharge from the volunteer army, Carleton was promoted to lieutenant colonel of the 4th U.S. Cavalry in July 1866. Carleton wrote several books on the military: The Battle of Buena Vista, Diary of an Excursion to the Ruins of Abaquara, and The Grand Quivira in New Mexico in 1853, and The Prairie Logbooks. Partly on the strength of the Battle of Buena Vista, Carleton received an appointment from Secretary of War Jefferson Davis in 1856 to make a study of European cavalry tactics. Carleton did not make the trip abroad himself, but based his report on the observations of Captain George B. McClellan, recently returned from Europe. Carleton died January 7, 1873, aged 59, in San Antonio, Texas, serving with the 4th Cavalry Regiment in his permanent rank of lieutenant colonel. He was buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery, Cambridge, Massachusetts. His son Henry was later buried beside him.